Welcome to Umbrella Rebellion. I'm Marcy.
And I'm Dee.
We are finding healing after leaving a cult.
We will be discussing abuse and personal experience with the ATI, IBLP, and fundamental churches.
Trigger warning. This podcast may contain descriptions of various forms of abuse. Please take care for your safety and well-being while you are listening.
If the content becomes too much for you to handle, please turn this off. We hope to expose harmful teachings that lead to and justify abuse,
with the hope that those that are experiencing abuse can find support and escape from it.
Welcome to Umbrella Rebellion and the Culty Book Club Saturday Book Club. We are here and we are ready to read The Body Keeps the Score, and we will have a discussion afterwards. We are, I think we're in part 7. Let me check where we're at. Yes, we are in chapter 7 of part 3. If you are behind on our reading, you can go to the red play button place, and there is a playlist that you can catch up. And one day, maybe just one day, I'll have enough people here that I can do playlists here on the other, app that I'm on. If you would like to follow along while I am reading, you can go to the red play button app and you can follow along there. Without further ado, let's see, I need to do a few things, make sure I got the things and the places and oops, I have a new setup, so I'm trying to figure all this out. Make sure y'all can see me, all that good stuff. Let's get started. Oh, don't want that. There we go. Whew. So, starting off from where we left off last week, men without mothers. The scientific study of the vital relationship between infants and their mothers was stated by upper-class Englishmen who were torn from their families as young boys to be sent off to boarding schools, where they were raised in regimented same-sex settings. The first time I visited the famed Tavistock Clinic in London, I noticed a collection of black and white photographs of these great 20th century psychiatrists hanging on the wall going up the main staircase. John Bowlby, Wilfred Bion, Henry Guntrip, Ronald Fairbairn, and Donald Winnicott. Each of them, in his own way, had explored how our early experiences become prototypes for all our later connections with others, and how our most intimate sense of self is created in our minute-to-minute exchanges with our caregivers. Scientists study what puzzles them most, so that they often become experts in subjects that others take for granted. Or, as the attachment researcher Beatrice Beebe once told me, most research is me search. These men who studied the role of mothers in children's lives had themselves been sent off to school at a vulnerable age, sometimes between 6 to 10, long before they should have faced the world alone. Bowlby himself told me that just boarding school experiences probably inspired George Orwell's novel. Bowlby himself told me that just such boarding school experiences probably inspired George Orwell's novel 1984, which brilliantly expresses how human beings may be induced to sacrifice everything they hold dear and true, including their sense of self, for the sake of being loved and approved of by someone in a position of authority. Since Bowlby was close friends with the Murrays, I had a chance to talk with him about his work whenever he visited Harvard. He was born into an aristocratic family. His father was surgeon to the king's household, and he trained in psychology, medicine, and psychoanalysis at the temples of the British establishment. I cannot read today. After attending Cambridge University, he worked with delinquent boys in London's East End, a notorious rough and crime-ridden neighborhood that was largely destroyed during the Blitz. During and after his service in World War II, he observed the effects of wartime evacuations and group nurseries that separated young children from their families. He also studied the effects of hospitalization, shown that even brief separation, parents back then were not allowed to visit overnight, compounded the children's suffering. By the late 1940s, Bowlby had become persona non grata in the British psychoanalytic community as a result of his radical claim that children's disturbed behavior was a response to actual life experiences, to neglect, brutality, and separation, rather than a product of infantile sexual fantasies. Undaunted, he devoted the rest of his life to developing what came to be called attachment theory, a secure base. As we enter this world, we scream to announce our presence. Someone immediately engages with us, bathes us, swaddles us, and fills our stomachs, and best of all, our mother may put us on her belly or breast for delicious skin-to-skin contact. We are profoundly social creatures. Our lives consist of finding our place within the community of human beings. I love the expression of the great French psychiatrist Pierre Janet. Every life is a piece of art, put together with all means available. As we grow up, we gradually learn to take care of ourselves, both physically and emotionally. But we get our first lessons in self care from the way that we are cared for. Mastering the skill of self regulation depends to a large degree on how harmonious our early interactions with our caregivers are. Children whose parents are reliable sources of comfort and strength have a lifetime advantage, a kind of buffer against the world that fate can hand them. John Bowlby realized that children are captivated by faces and voices and are exquisitely sensitive to facial expressions, posture, tone of voice, physiological changes, tempo of movement, and inception action. He saw this inborn capacity as a product of evolution, essential to the survival of those helpless creatures. Children are also programmed to choose one particular adult, or at most a few, with whom their natural communication system develops. This creates a primary attachment bond. The more responsive the adult is to the child, the deeper the attachment, and the more likely the child will develop healthy ways of responding to the people around him. Bowlby would often visit Regent's Park in London, where he would make systemic observations of the interactions between children and their mothers. While the mothers sat quietly on park benches, knitting or reading the paper, the kids would wander off to explore, occasionally looking over their shoulders to ascertain that Mum was still watching. But when a neighbor stopped by and absorbed his mother's interest with the latest gossip, the kids would run back and stay close, making sure he still had her attention. When infants and young children notice that their mothers are not fully engaged with them, they become nervous. When their mothers disappear from sight, they may cry and become inconsolable. But as soon as their mothers return, they quiet down and resume their play. Bowlby saw attachment as the secure base from which a child moves out into the world. Over the subsequent 5 decades, research has firmly established research has firmly established that having a safe haven promotes self-reliance and instills a sense of sympathy and helpfulness to others in distress. From the intimate give and take of the attachment bond, children learn that other people have feelings and thoughts that are both similar to and different from theirs. In other words, they get in sync with their environment and with the people around them and develop the self-awareness, empathy, impulse control, and self-motivation that make it possible to become contributing members of the larger social culture. Those qualities are painfully missing in the kids at our children's clinic. So going back to last week, he was talking about his experience in a children's clinic, and they studied the difference of children who had experienced trauma within the home and without the home. The dance of attunement. Children become attached to whoever functions as their primary caregiver, but the nature of that attachment, whether it is secure or insecure, makes a huge difference over the course of a child's life. Secure attachment develops when caregiving includes emotional attunement. Attunement starts at the most subtle physical levels of interaction between babies and their caretakers, and it gives babies the feeling of being met and understood. As Edinburgh-based attachment researcher Colwyn Trevarthen says, the brain coordinates rhythmic body movements and guides them to act in sympathy with other people's brains. Infants hear and learn musically from their mother's talk, even before birth. In Chapter 4, I describe the discovery of mirror neurons to the brain-to-brain links that give our capacity for empathy. Mirror neurons start functioning as soon as babies are born. When researcher Andrew Melzoff of the University of Washington When researcher Andrew Melzoff of the University of Washington pursed his lips or stuck out his tongue at 6-hour-old babies, they promptly mirrored his actions. Newborns can focus their eyes only on objects within 8 to 12 inches, just enough to see the person who is holding them. Imitation is our most fundamental social skill. It assures that we automatically pick up and reflect the behavior of our parents, teachers, and peers. Most parents relate to their babies so spontaneously that they are barely aware of how attunement unfolds. But an invitation from a friend, the attachment researcher Ed Tronick, gave me the chance to observe that process more closely through a one-way mirror at Harvard's Laboratory of Human Development. I watched a mother playing with her 2-month-old son, who was propped in an infant seat facing her. They were cooing to each other and having a wonderful time, until the mother leaned in to nuzzle him, and the baby, in his excitement, yanked on her hair. The mother was caught unawares and yelped with pain, pushing away his hand while her face contorted with anger. The baby let go immediately, and they pulled back physically from each other. For both of them, the source of delight had become a source of distress. Obviously frightening, the baby brought his hand up to his face to block out the sight of his angry mother. The mother, in turn, realizing that her baby was upset, refocused on him, making soothing sounds in an attempt to soothe things over. The infant still had his eyes covered, but his craving for connection soon reemerged. He started peeking out to see if the coast was clear. While the mother reached towards him with a concerned expression, as she started to tickle his belly, he dropped his arms and broke into a happy giggle, and harmony was reestablished. Infant and mother were attuned again. This entire sequence of delight, rupture, repair, and new delight took slightly less than 12 seconds. Welcome in, welcome in. Tronick and other researchers have now shown that when infants and caregivers are in sync on an emotional level, they're also in sync physically. Babies can't regulate their own emotional states, much less the changes in heart rate, hormone levels, and nervous system activity that accompany emotions. When a child is in sync with his caregiver, his sense of joy and connection is reflected in his steady heartbeat and breathing and a low level of stress hormones. His body is calm, so are his emotions. The moment the music is disrupted, as it is often as it often is in the course of a normal day, all these physiological factors change as well. You can tell equilibrium has been restored when the physiology calms down. We soothe newborns, but parents soon start teaching their children to tolerate higher levels of arousal. Thank you for the likes. A job that is often assigned to fathers. I once heard a psychologist, John Gottman, say, "Mother's stroke and father's poke." Learning how to manage arousal is a key life skill, and parents must do it for babies before babies can do it for themselves. If that gnawing sensation in his belly makes a baby cry, the breast or bottle arrives. If he's scared, someone holds and rocks him until he calms down. If his bowels erupt, someone comes to make him clean and dry. Associating intense sensations with safety, comfort, and mastery is the foundation of self-regulation, self-soothing, and self-nurture, a theme to which I return throughout this book. A secure attachment combined with the cultivation of competency builds an internal locus of control, the key factor in healthy coping throughout life. Securely attached children learn what makes them feel good. They discover what makes them and others feel bad, and they acquire a sense of agency. That their actions can change how they feel and how others respond. Securely attached kids learn the difference between situations they can control and situations where they need help. They learn that they can play an active role when faced with difficult situations. In contrast, children with histories of abuse and neglect learn that their terror, pleading, and crying do not register with their caregiver. Nothing they can do or say stops them the beating or bringing Nothing they can do or say stops the beating or brings attention and help. In effect, they're being conditioned to give up when they face challenges later in life. Interesting. Becoming real. Bowlby's contemporary, the pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, is the father of modern studies of attunement. His minute observations of mothers and children started with the way mothers hold their babies. He proposed that these physical interactions laid the groundwork for a baby's sense of self, and with that, a lifelong sense of identity. The way a mother holds her child underlies, open quote, the ability to feel the body as the place where the psyche lives, end quote. This visceral and kinesiatic sensation of how our bodies are met lays the foundation for what we experience as real. Winnicott thought that the vast majority of mothers did just fine in their attunement to their infants. It does not require extraordinary talent to be what he called a good enough mother. But things can go seriously wrong when mothers are unable to tune in to their baby's physical reality. If a mother cannot meet the baby's impulses and needs, open quote, the baby learns to become the mother's idea of what the baby is, end quote. Having to discount its inner sensations and trying to adjust to its caregiver's needs means the child perceives that, open quote, something is wrong, end quote, with the way it is. Children who lack physical attunement are vulnerable to shutting down the direct feedback from their bodies, the seat of pleasure, purpose, and direction. In the years since Bowlby's and Winnicott's ideas were introduced, attachment research around the world has shown that the vast majority of children are securely attached. When they grow up, their history of reliable, responsive caregiving will help to keep fear and anxiety at bay. Barring exposure to some overwhelming life event, trauma, that breaks down the self-regulatory system, they will maintain a foundational state of emotional security throughout their lives. Secure attachment also forms a template for children's relationships. They pick up what others are feeling and early on learn to tell a game from reality, and they develop a good nose for phony situations or dangerous people. Securely attached children usually become pleasant playmates and have lots of self-affirming experiences with their peers. Having learned to be in tune with other people, they tend to notice subtle changes in voices and faces and to adjust their behavior accordingly. They learn to live within a shared understanding of the world and are likely to become valued members of the community. This upward spiral can, however, be reversed by abuse or neglect. Abused kids are often very sensitive to changes in voice and faces, but they tend to respond to them as threats rather than as cues for staying in sync. Dr. Seth Pollock of the University of Wisconsin showed a series of faces to a group of normal 8-year-olds and compared their responses with those of a group of abused children the same age. Looking at the spectrum of angry to sad expressions, the abused kids were hyper alert to the slightest feature of anger. And in the book, they have a varying degree of facial expressions. None of them look angry well, okay, there's a few angry ones. So it looks like sad to no feeling to anger. This is one reason abused children so easily become defensive or scared. Imagine what it's like to make your way through a sea of faces in the school corridor, trying to figure out who might assault you. Children who overreact to their peers' aggression, who don't pick up on other kids' needs, who easily shut down or lose control of their impulses, are likely to be shunned and left out of sleepovers or playdates. Eventually, they may learn to cover up their fear by putting up a tough front, or they may spend more and more time alone, watching TV or playing computer games, falling even further behind on interpersonal skills and emotional self-regulation. The need for attachment never lessens. Most human beings simply cannot tolerate being disengaged from others for any length of time. People who cannot connect through work, friendships, or family usually find other ways of bonding, as through illness, lawsuits, or family feuds. Anything is preferable to the godforsaken sense of irrelevance and alienation. Interesting. A few years ago on Christmas Eve, I was called to examine a 14-year-old boy at the Suffolk County Jail. Jack had been arrested for breaking into the house of neighbors who were away on vacation. The burglar alarm was howling when the police found him in the living room. The first question I asked Jack, was who he expected would visit him in jail on Christmas. Nobody, he told me. Nobody ever pays attention to me. It turned out that he had been caught during break-ins numerous times before. He knew the police and they knew him. With delight in his voice, he told me that when the cops saw him standing in the middle of the living room, they yelled, "Oh my God, it's Jack again, that little MFer." Somebody recognized him. Somebody knew his name. A little while later, Jack confessed, open quote, "You know, that is what makes it worthwhile," end quote. Kids will go to almost any lengths to feel seen and connected. Interesting. Living with the parents you have. Children have a biological instinct to attach. They have no choice. Whether their parents or caregivers are loving and caring or distant, insensitive, rejecting, or abusive, children will develop a coping style based on their attempt to get at least some of their needs met. We now have reliable ways to assess and identify these coping styles. thanks largely to the work of two American scientists, Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main, and their colleagues, who conducted thousands of hours of observations of mother-infant pairs over many years. Based on these studies, Ainsworth created a research tool called the strange situation, which looks at how an infant reacts to temporary separation from the mother. Just as Bowlby had observed, securely attached infants are distressed when their mother leaves them, but they show delight when she returns. And after a brief check in for reassurance, they settle down and resume their play. This drives me nuts because reading about this makes me realize how damaging, I mean, like I knew it was damaging, but how damaging the cry it out method was that fundamentalists used when it came to babies and their needs. I mean, wow. You know, you stop crying when nobody comes, right? But with infants who are insecurely attached, the picture is more complex. Children whose primary caregiver is unresponsive or rejecting learn to deal with their anxiety in two distinct ways. The researchers noticed that some seemed chronically upset and demanding with their mothers, while others were more passive and withdrawn. In both groups, contact with the mothers failed to settle them down. They did not return to play contentedly, as happens in secure attachment. In one pattern called avoidant attachment, the infant looks like nothing really bothers them. They don't cry when their mother goes away, and they ignore her when she comes back. However, this does not mean that they are unaffected. In fact, their chronically increased heart rates show that they are in a constant state of hyperarousal. My colleagues and I call this pattern dealing but not feeling. Most mothers of avoidant infants seem to dislike touching their children. They have trouble snuggling and holding them, and they don't use their facial expressions and voices to create pleasurable back and forth rhythms with their babies. In another pattern called anxious or ambivalent attachment, the infants constantly draw attention to themselves by crying, yelling, clinging, or screaming. They are feeling but not dealing. They seem to have concluded that unless they make a spectacle, nobody is going to pay attention to them. They become enormously upset when they do not know where their mother is, but derive little comfort from her return. And even though they don't seem to enjoy her company, they stay passively or angrily focused on her, even in situations when other children would rather play. Attachment researchers think that the three organized attachment strategies, secure, avoidant, and anxious, work because they elicit the best care a particular caregiver is capable of providing. Infants who encounter a consistent pattern of care, even if it's marked by emotional distance or insensitivity, can adapt to maintain the relationship. That does not mean that there are no problems. Attachment patterns often persist into adulthood. Anxious toddlers tend to grow into anxious adults, while avoidant toddlers are likely to become adults who are out of touch with their own feelings and those of others. As in, there's nothing wrong with a good whooping. I got smacked trying to, filter these words, and it made me the success I am today. In school, avoidant children are likely to bully other kids, while the anxious children are often their victims. However, development is not linear, and many life experiences can intervene to change these outcomes. But there is another group that is less. Oh, a comment from the other app. I saw the 19 Kids and Counting, and when they talked about the cry it out, made me mad. Yeah. Yeah, that was heavily suggested for me, and I think some of my kids' attachment issues are because of that. All right, I forgot where it was. Right, so however, development is not linear and many life experiences can intervene to change these outcomes. But there is another group that is less stably adapted, a group that makes up the bulk of the children we treat and a substantial proportion of the adults who are seen in psychiatric clinics. Some 20 years ago, Mary Main and her colleagues at Berkeley began to identify a group of children, about 15% of those they studied, who seemed to be unable to figure out how to engage with their caregivers. The critical issue turned out to be that the caregivers themselves were a source of distress or terror to the children. Children in this situation have no one to turn to, and they are faced with an unsolvable dilemma. Their mothers are simultaneously necessary for survival and a source of fear. They, open quote, can neither approach the secure and ambivalent strategies, shift their attention, the avoidant strategy, nor flee, end quote. If you observe such children in a nursery school or attachment laboratory, you see them look toward their parents when they enter the room and then quickly turn away, unable to choose between seeking closeness and avoiding the parent. They may rock on their hands and knees, appear to go into a trance, freeze with their arms raised, or get up to greet their parents and then fall to the ground. Not knowing who is safe or whom they belong to, they may be intensely affectionate with strangers or may trust nobody. Maine called this pattern, quote unquote, disorganized attachment. Disorganized attachment is, open quote, fright without solution, end quote. Some of this is crazy. Some of this is reminiscent of childhood memories. Yay, trauma! Becoming disorganized within. Conscientious parents often become alarmed when they discover attachment research, worrying that their occasional impatience or their ordinary lapses in attunement may permanently damage their kids. In real life, they are bound to be misunderstandings, inept responses, and failures of communication because mothers and fathers miss cues or are simply preoccupied with other matters. Infants are frequently left to their own devices to discover how they can calm themselves down. Within limits, this is not a problem. Kids need to learn to handle frustrations and disappointments. With quote unquote good enough caregivers, children learn that broken connections can be repaired. The critical issue is whether they can incorporate a feeling of being viscerally safe with their parents or other caregivers. In a study of attachment patterns in over 2,000 infants in normal middle class environments, 62% were found to be secure, 15% avoidant, 9% anxious, also known as ambivalent, and 15% disorganized. Interestingly, the large study showed that the children's gender and basic temperament have little effect on attachment style. For example, children with difficult temperaments are more likely to develop a disorganized style. Kids from lower socioeconomic groups are more likely to be disorganized, with parents often severely stressed by economic and family instability. Children who don't feel safe in infancy have trouble regulating their moods and emotional responses as they grow older. By kindergarten, many disorganized infants are either aggressive or spaced out and disengaged, and they go on to develop a range of psychiatric problems. They also show more psychological stress as expressed in heart rate variability, stress hormone responses, and lowered immune factors. Does this kind of biological dysregulation automatically reset to normal as a child matures or is moved to a safe environment? So far as we know, it does not. Parental abuse is not the only cause of disorganized attachment. Parents who are preoccupied with their own trauma, such as domestic abuse or rape, or the recent unaliving of a parent or sibling, may also be too emotionally unstable and inconsistent to offer much comfort and protection. While all parents need all the help they can get to help raise secure children, traumatized parents in particular need help to be attuned to their children's needs. Caregivers often don't realize that they are out of tune. I vividly remember a videotape Beatrice Beebe showed me. It featured a young mother playing with her 3-month-old infant. Everything was going well until the baby pulled back and turned his head away, signaling that he needed a break. But the mother did not pick up on his cue, and she intensified her efforts to engage him by bringing her face closer to his and increasing the volume of her voice. When he recoiled even more, she kept bouncing and poking him. Finally, he started to scream, at which point the mother put him down and walked away, looking crestfallen. She obviously felt terrible, but she had simply missed the relevant cues. It's easy to imagine how this kind of misattunement, repeated over and over again, can gradually lead to a chronic disconnection. Anyone who's raised a colicky or hyperactive baby knows how quickly stress rises when nothing seems to make a difference. Chronically failing to calm her baby down and establishing an enjoyable face to face interaction, the mother is likely to come up to perceive him as a difficult child who makes her feel like a failure and give up on trying to comfort her child. In practice, it often is difficult to distinguish the problems that result from disorganized attachment from those that result from trauma. They are often intertwined. My colleague Rachel Yehuda studied rates of PTSD in adult New Yorkers who had been assaulted or raped. Those whose mothers were Holocaust survivors with PTSD had significantly higher rate of developing serious psychological problems after these traumatic experiences. The most reasonable explanation is that their upbringing had left them with a vulnerable psychological. The most reasonable explanation is that their upbringing had left them with a vulnerable psychology, making it difficult for them to regain their equilibrium after being violated. Yehuda found a similar vulnerability in the children of pregnant women who were in the World Trade Center on the fatal day in 2001. Similarly, the reactions of children to painful events are largely determined by how calm or stressed their parents are. My former student, Glenn Saxey, now chairman of the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NYU, showed that when children were hospitalized for treatment of severe burns, the development of PTSD could be predicted by how safe they felt with their mothers. The security of their attachment and their mothers predicated the amount of morphine that was required to control their pain. The more secure and the attachment, the less painkiller was needed. Another colleague, Claude Shemtab, who directs the Family Trauma Research Program at NYU Langone Medical Center, studied 112 New York City children who had directly witnessed the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Children whose mother were diagnosed with PTSD or depression during follow-up were 6 times more likely to have significant emotional problems and 11 times more likely to have be hyper-aggressive in response to their experience. Children whose fathers had PTSD showed behavioral problems as well, but Chemtab discovered that the effect was indirect and was transmitted via the mother. Living with an irascible, withdrawn, or terrified spouse is likely to impose a major psychological burden on the partner, including depression. If you have no internal sense of security, it is difficult to distinguish between safety and danger. If you feel chronically numbed out, potentially dangerous situations may make you feel alive. If you conclude that you must be a terrible person, because why else would your parents have to have treated you that way, you start expecting other people to treat you horribly. You probably deserve it. And anyway, there is nothing you can do about it. When disorganized people carry self perceptions like these, they are set up to be traumatized by subsequent experiences. Okay, I think I'm going to read the next little section and then we are going to open up to discussion if you would like to get in a box and talk about what we've read or things going on in your life. That would be available on the TikTok. So this is The Body Keeps the Score. The long-term effects of disorganized attachment. In the early 1980s, my colleague Carlin Lyons Ruth, Harvard attachment researcher, began to videotape face-to-face interactions between mothers and their infants at 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months. She taped them again when the children were 5 years old and once more when they were 7 or 8. All were from high-risk families. 100% met federal poverty guidelines, and almost half the mothers were single parents. Disorganized attachment showed up in 2 different ways. One group of mothers seemed to be too preoccupied with their own issues to attend to their infants. They were often intrusive and hostile. They alternated between rejecting their infants and acting as if they expected them to respond to their needs. Another group of mothers seemed helpless and fearful. They often came across as sweet or fragile, but they didn't know how to be an adult in the relationship and seemed to want their children to comfort them. They failed to greet their children after having been away and did not pick them up when the children were distressed. The mothers didn't seem to be doing these things deliberately. They simply didn't know how to attune to their kids and respond to their cues, and thus failed to comfort and reassure them. The hostile, intrusive mothers were more likely to have childhood histories of physical abuse and or of witnessing domestic violence, while the withdrawn dependent mothers were more likely to have histories of sexual abuse or parental loss, but not physical abuse. I have always wondered how parents come to abuse their kids. After all, raising healthy offspring is the very core of our human sense of purpose and meaning. What could drive parents to deliberately hurt or neglect their children? Carlin's research provided me with one answer. Watching her videos, I could see the children become more and more inconsolable, sullen, and resistant to their misattuned mothers. At the same time, the mothers became increasingly frustrated, defeated, and helpless in their interactions. Once the mother comes to see the child not as her partner in an attunement relationship, but as a frustrating, enraging, disconnected stranger, the stage is set for subsequent abuse. About 18 years later, when the kids were around 20 years old, Lyons Ruth did a follow-up study to see how they were coping. Infants with serious disrupted emotional communication patterns with their mothers at 18 months grew up to become young adults with an unstable sense of self-damaging impulsivity, including excessive spending, promiscuous sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, and binge eating, inappropriate and intense anger, and recurrent SI behavior. Carlene and her colleagues had expected that hostile, intrusive behavior on the part of the mothers would be the most powerful predictor of mental instability in their adult children, but they discovered otherwise. Emotionally withdrawn had the most profound and long-lasting impact. Emotional distance and role reversal, in which mothers expected the kids to look after them. were significantly linked to aggressive behavior against self and others in the young adults. Very interesting. Whew. That was a lot. That was heavy. All right. So we are still on chapter 7. And I am going to end the reading here and open it up for discussion if anybody would like to get in the box and talk about the book, about what we read, or anything, going on with you that you would like to talk about. Or if you are on the other app and you want to, talk about it in the comments, go ahead and we can do that as well. What I find super interesting is just understanding these things from the perspective of psychology and secular worldview, as opposed to how people view parenting on through fundamentalism, and how set up for failure parents were as fundamentalists, and how it baffles me. I really want to get into the study of Dobson and his early works, and just where things seem to have gone wrong with him, because it's almost like he didn't follow the science at a certain point and stopped believing in psychiatry. I mean, he was a licensed psychiatrist at one point. I don't know if he lost it, didn't maintain it, or what, but the harm that was done to children through him and is astronomical. And a lot of it was about, parenting and attachment, different attachment styles, and dealing with your children in a way that was not conducive to emotional regulation. That's something that's kind of been a discussion in our family lately is I did not learn emotional regulation as a child, and therefore, when I had children, I could not teach them emotional regulation. I was extremely emotionally unregulated as an adult, and I'm 46 and I'm learning about emotional regulation now and working on it and getting better at it, right? So it is extremely hard to see the effects of how attachment and emotional regulation has affected my children, or lack thereof, I should say. But you can't do better until you know better, and that's kind of where I'm at. I'm trying to do better because I know better, trying to learn how to do better. And I think this book is helping for me because it helps me understand these things on a secular level, without the Bible mixed into it, and without that, if you do it wrong, your kid's gonna go to hell, stress that was always on me as a parent in fundamentalism. And being able to, like he said in this section, one of these sections, that it wasn't necessarily about being inconsistent as a parent causing damage. It was the consistency of the harm that lends to the problems, with children. And you're not going to always be perfect, and you're not going to always do things right, but that doesn't destroy them for the rest of their lives. But I'm also thinking, hey, good to see you, Sparkaholic. Sparkaholic. What? Oh, but yeah, it's super interesting to just kind of really delve into these topics and see them outside of, the religious frame that I had in my early adulthood. But yeah. So I don't know if anybody wants to get up in the box and, I know you weren't really here, Spark, for the reading, but we were talking about attachment styles and his study of and the different people, his colleagues that studied attachment styles and their findings. Pretty interesting. And I kind of talked about the cry it out method and how damaging that was to children because, they're crying for a reason, even if it is just to be comforted. So, yeah. Oh, I need to text my husband. I told him I would text him when I was finished reading. Okay. Is there anything else anybody wants to talk about today before I get off? Anything going on in y'all's lives? What's happening? What's crack-a-lacking? I'm kind of excited that I eked out a little spot for my podcasting. Oh, dude. Not me. Goodness. Oh, goodness. I told him, can you call? He was supposed to call somebody else. He called me. Oh, goodness. All right. No problem. I get it. If you want to catch up, there's a playlist on the red play button app. Oh, man. It's been kind of crazy for me, too. He fell asleep. Um, but yeah, it's real interesting. And I don't know, it's just trying to look back at the past and seeing where things may have set different things in motion, and then trying to figure out how to change those things, right? Because a lot of us are actively trying to change patterns in our family and break the cycles. And it's not easy. It is not easy. And you make a lot of mistakes. I just hope that I of course. It I just hope that it's like laying the foundation for my kids to break it even further. So I think some of them are not going to pass on any of this because they are choosing not to have children, but we'll see. There's a lot of them are still pretty young. But and I only have one that has a kid right now. Oh yeah, aren't we always the black sheep, the ones that break the cycle? It's insane. Oh, yeah. So, all right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get going and hopefully think next weekend my kid does have soccer, but it's too far for me to actually go, so probably will be able to do Culty Book Club again. So hopefully I will see you next Saturday if I don't see you before. And don't forget tomorrow is Sunday affirmations, and I got to figure out what I'm going to tell y'all, how I'm going to affirm y'all this week. All right, y'all have a great day, and if somebody has not told you today or ever, I am proud of you.